Canada will open a new consulate in Greenland this week. Greenland is described as an autonomous territory of Denmark, and like Canada, Donald Trump has talked about wanting to annex the huge Arctic island and its 58,000 people.
Canada just delivered one of its most strategic diplomatic moves of the year, quietly, confidently, and directly in the middle of Donald Trump's favorite geopolitical fantasyland. While Trump continues to boast about how the United States should get Greenland and openly muses about acquiring the island one way or another, Greenland's own leaders have now sent a signal he cannot ignore. When Canada announced the opening of its first-ever consulate in Nuuk, a Greenland MP reacted with one single word: finally. And with that, the Arctic power game shifted.
Well, our first reaction was finally, because for a long time our cousins, families, our kins from Canada and Alaska as well, the consulate is another step in collaboration between the Greenlandic people and the Canadians.
Foreign Affairs Minister Anita Anand traveled to Nuuk this week to launch what appears to be a new era in Canada-Greenland relations. She arrived not only as a representative of a G7 country, but as the first high-level Canadian minister to visit Greenland in years. The move comes at a time when the Arctic is no longer a quiet frontier. It is a geopolitical crossroads contested by the United States, China, Russia, Denmark, and increasingly Canada. In his interview with CBC's Hanuman Singh Tonight, Greenland MP Pelle Broberg described his reaction to the consulate as a long overdue moment. He pointed out that the Inuit of Canada, Alaska, and Greenland have shared cultural, familial, and historical connections for generations, yet their governments have lacked the kind of structured political relationship that a consulate finally makes possible. Broberg admitted he learned of the decision only a day earlier, but emphasized the symbolism and timing could not be more important. Greenland buys Canadian goods already. He even joked about how many Canadian snowmobiles the island uses. But all of those imports must travel through Denmark first, inflating costs for an already expensive place to live. And that is where this story becomes much bigger than a simple diplomatic opening. Broberg not only welcomed the Canadian presence, he also expressed a wish many Canadians may find surprising. Greenland has long wanted closer integration with North America's trade system. For years, the island looked at NAFTA and now USMCA with envy. Now, Broberg says, Canada might be the country that finally helps Greenland become part of that North American orbit.
To understand why Broberg's enthusiasm matters, we have to revisit Donald Trump's Arctic obsession. From his first term onward, Trump repeatedly suggested the United States should acquire Greenland. He called it a strategic opportunity, insisted the idea was not off the table, and publicly floated buying the island as casually as one buys real estate. According to reporting from Reuters, AP, and Vanity Fair, he even hinted the U.S. could secure control one way or another. The reaction in Greenland was volcanic. Leaders described the idea as colonial, insulting, and fundamentally disrespectful to their autonomy. Denmark's prime minister dismissed Trump's proposal as absurd, triggering a diplomatic clash that lasted weeks. Trump's behavior damaged Washington's credibility in the region, and although the U.S. maintains its consulate in Nuuk and still oversees the American-run Thule Air Base, political trust has been eroding ever since. That erosion matters because geopolitics is not just about military positions or frozen coastlines. It is about trust, identity, and who listens. On this front, Trump lost Greenland years ago, and Canada has now taken a step to fill that gap. Mark Carney's foreign policy reset arrives at a moment when the Arctic is becoming one of the most contested regions on the planet. By opening a consulate in Nuuk, Canada is moving from symbolic northern rhetoric to a concrete presence, something previous governments spoke about but never executed. For Greenland, Canada offers what neither Denmark nor the United States has provided, a partner that understands Inuit ties, respects local autonomy, and sits just across the water. Broberg's finally reflected more than relief. It captured a sense that Canada is arriving exactly when Greenland is rethinking its economic future. With costs rising and European supply chains stretched, the island is looking west, and Canada has shown up at the right time to be taken seriously. Broberg's interview may have sounded diplomatic, but it carried a quiet warning for Washington.
By praising Canada's approach and distancing himself from Trump's rhetoric, he signaled that Greenland is increasingly open to partners who treat it as an equal. His comments about separating politics from trade underscored that Greenland no longer wants to be defined by Denmark's supply routes or America's ambitions. Economic practicality now outweighs old loyalties, and Canada is stepping into that space at precisely the right moment. For the United States, especially under Trump, this shift is a reminder that Arctic influence is no longer guaranteed.
If Canada plays this right, the consulate in Nuuk can be more than an office. It can be the cornerstone of a northern strategy that elevates Canada's influence in the Arctic, at a time when global powers are scrambling for position. It gives Canada a permanent diplomatic hand in a territory rich in minerals, waterways, and strategic military value. It strengthens Inuit-to-Inuit diplomacy across the Arctic. And it positions Canada as a potential bridge for Greenland into future North American trading arrangements. Most importantly, it hands Canada something it rarely has in its dealings with Washington: leverage. In the upcoming 2026 USMCA review, Canada will enter negotiations with more Arctic relevance than at any point in the last decade.
Trump cannot dismiss what just happened because it intersects with every part of his agenda. He wants dominance in the Arctic. He wants control over choke points and security assets. He wants to contain China's and Russia's northern advances. And he wants the U.S. to remain the undisputed power in North America. For all of that to work, Greenland has to lean toward Washington. But now, Greenland is leaning toward Ottawa. If Canada deepens these ties through trade, infrastructure, Inuit cooperation, or energy collaboration, it will challenge Trump's long-standing assumption that the Arctic naturally falls under American influence. Trump may not say it publicly, but the symbolism is unmistakable. Canada showed up, Washington hesitated, and Greenland noticed. Canada's new consulate in Nuuk is not just a ribbon-cutting story. It is a strategic move that exposes cracks in America's Arctic diplomacy, gives Greenland new political options, and opens the door for Canada to redefine northern leadership at a moment when global competition is intensifying. Trump may try to reassert control, but Greenland's message was unmistakable. Canada is welcome, and in the Arctic, influence belongs to the nation that actually shows up. The only question now is whether the United States understands what it just lost and whether Canada is ready to capitalize on what it just gained.
Denmark is accusing the United States, one of its closest allies, of acting more like an adversary by conducting covert operations in Greenland.
Denmark and the U.S. are close allies, not only in NATO, but in many different fields. Friends and allies, they don't spy on each other.
Greenland has long been viewed as a strategically important territory for global powers. With vast natural resources and a commanding position in the Arctic, it has drawn attention far beyond its size. Today, the island is again at the center of tension. Denmark has accused the United States of running covert operations to stir division inside Greenland, a charge that has shaken one of NATO's closest alliances. Danish officials warn that such influence campaigns violate international law and trust among allies. At the same time, Canada is moving in a very different direction. Instead of pressure, Ottawa is strengthening ties with Denmark through green energy and trade cooperation, signaling that the Arctic is no longer an arena dominated by Washington alone.
One way or the other, we're going to get it.
Trump's focus on Greenland is not new. The island offers enormous strategic value. From military bases that monitor Russia to deposits of critical minerals, securing Greenland would give the United States leverage in the global balance of power. Reports from Denmark's public broadcaster revealed that at least 3 Americans with connections to Trump or his administration were linked to covert influence campaigns. These operatives were said to encourage separatist sentiment and build networks sympathetic to Trump's ambitions. To many observers in Europe, this resembled Russia's earlier tactics in Ukraine, where local divisions were amplified before force was applied. Denmark responded by summoning the top U.S. diplomat in Copenhagen and opening investigations. The implications go beyond Greenland itself, raising doubts about whether the United States is undermining trust inside NATO, an alliance meant to prevent this very behavior.
Denmark and the U.S. are, like Canada, members of NATO.
The Danish public broadcaster uncovered evidence in a stunning investigation that men with ties to Trump tried to infiltrate Greenland, pointing to intelligence that at least 3 Americans with connections to the president were involved in covert influence operations. Trump has repeatedly threatened to annex the territory, which, like Canada, has vast critical minerals and strategic military bases in the Arctic.
While Washington's actions spark controversy, Canada is carving out a quieter but highly significant role with Denmark. Ottawa has been working with Copenhagen to build what some call a green trade corridor. In February 2025, Canada joined the Global Offshore Wind Alliance, a move that tied its Atlantic provinces to Denmark's world-leading expertise in offshore wind. Projects like the Toklu Wind and Hydrogen Development in Newfoundland and Labrador, backed by Copenhagen infrastructure partners, aim to produce green hydrogen for export to Europe. Denmark's concept of energy islands, artificial platforms that connect wind farms and hydrogen production, is already influencing Canadian planning. Beyond energy, Canada's aluminum sector is also gaining an edge. Because Canadian aluminum is produced largely with hydropower, it is among the cleanest in the world. With the European Union's carbon border adjustment mechanism set to take effect in 2026, aluminum produced with fossil fuels will face new tariffs. That gives Canadian producers a competitive advantage, as Europe looks for reliable, low-carbon suppliers. In 2024, Canada-Denmark bilateral trade reached about $2.7 billion according to official figures, but the real significance lies in the kind of trade being developed. Green energy technology, hydrogen, and Arctic cooperation are all areas where Canada and Denmark are laying the groundwork for long-term influence.
What emerges are 2 competing futures. On one side, Donald Trump pursues influence with threats and alleged covert operations. On the other, Canada and Denmark build their position through cooperation, sustainable industries, and a steady link to Europe. Canada is not merely reacting to American pressure. By aligning with Denmark, it is creating strategic options that reduce dependence on the U.S. market and broaden its reach across the Atlantic. The future of the Arctic will not be defined by who makes the loudest claims, but by who builds the most resilient alliances. On that front, Canada and Denmark already stand strong, showing that influence can be earned through partnership rather than force.
In September, we announced the first group, the first tranche of these projects that we referred to the Major Projects Office for accelerated deployment. On top of that list is the new Darlington project, nuclear project. Canada's new government is putting forward $2 billion to build new clean energy technology, the first of its kind in Canada.
Canada is on its way to becoming an energy superpower, and it's happening faster than anyone expected. East of Toronto, at the Darlington nuclear site, Prime Minister Mark Carney and Ontario Premier Doug Ford stood side by side to announce what they called a turning point in Canada's industrial story. The 2 leaders unveiled a massive plan, 4 new small modular reactors, or SMRs, backed by $2 billion from the federal government and another $1 billion from Ontario's Building Ontario Fund. The Darlington project will be the first of its kind in the G7 and Canada's boldest step yet into next-generation nuclear power. By placing it in the major projects category, Ottawa and Queen's Park can speed up regulatory approvals and construction, trimming years off the normal process. What looks like a regional energy project is, in reality, a national industrial strategy. It is designed to protect Canadian supply chains, secure energy independence, and rebuild high-value jobs that have been squeezed by America's aggressive trade policy. While Washington leans on tariffs to pull production south, Canada is betting on reactors to keep its industries alive at home. The Darlington SMR plan marks the start of a new era for Canadian energy. The reactors will use GE Hitachi's BWRX-300 technology, a compact modular design that produces about 300 megawatts each, roughly one-third the output of a conventional nuclear plant, but built at a fraction of the cost and time. The site east of Toronto is already being prepared by Ontario Power Generation, OPG, which operates the existing Darlington station. According to OPG's project filings in 2025, construction will support as many as 18,000 jobs across Ontario and generate around $500 million in local economic activity every year once the 4 units are running. For Carney and Ford, this is not just about electricity, it is about building an industrial base that can resist external shocks. Nuclear energy provides stable, emission-free power that manufacturers, data centers, and transport networks will depend on for decades. Carney called it a foundation for Canada's next industrial century, emphasizing that homegrown energy is key to long-term competitiveness. By declaring the reactors a major project, Ottawa cut the average approval time by nearly 40%, allowing groundwork to start immediately. The move signals a shift from bureaucracy to execution, a practical, business-like approach to nation-building. For Ford, whose province remains Canada's manufacturing hub, the stakes are high. Ontario's economy has lost thousands of auto and steel jobs as global supply chains shifted under U.S. tariffs. The SMR investment promises to restore confidence that Ontario can once again anchor heavy industry with reliable, affordable power made in Canada.
Canada's first SMR is being built east of Toronto with plans in place to build 3 more units at that same site, and it could serve as a blueprint for Alberta.
The impact of Darlington's announcement didn't stop at Ontario's borders. It sparked a wave of interest across the country, and Alberta was quick to answer. Alberta Premier Danielle Smith revealed that her province would begin public consultations on adding nuclear power to its energy mix. Alberta has long depended on natural gas to supply electricity, but the Premier said small modular reactors could offer a cleaner and more reliable base load, especially for the province's massive oil sand operations. The model she pointed to was Darlington. The 4 SMRs being built east of Toronto are now the blueprint for Canada's nuclear future, a modular system that can be replicated province by province. Smith noted that SMRs can be prefabricated and shipped to site, cutting both costs and construction risk. The technology's scalability is what makes it attractive. Each 300-megawatt reactor can power roughly 300,000 homes, and multiple units can be combined for larger grids. For Alberta, this isn't just an energy decision, it's an industrial one. The province aims to attract nuclear-related manufacturing, engineering, and maintenance jobs, the kind that sustain long-term regional growth. By aligning with Ontario's lead, Alberta joins a growing national shift toward nuclear collaboration, signaling that Canada's path to energy independence is no longer an Ontario story, but a pan-Canadian transformation. Together, the 2 provinces represent opposite poles of the country's energy landscape, one rooted in manufacturing, the other in hydrocarbons, now united by a common goal: to make Canada self-reliant in power generation and industrial security.
South of the border, the news from Ontario came as a surprise. The Trump administration has spent 2025 doubling down on tariffs that were meant to pull investment back to American soil. By targeting Canadian steel, aluminum, and autos with 25% duties, Washington hoped to weaken its northern neighbor's competitiveness. But instead of retreating, Canada moved in the opposite direction. Tariffs that were meant to hurt have forced Canada to reinvent itself. The Darlington SMR plan is the clearest example of that. A project born from pressure, financed through national funds, and built entirely within Canada's borders. Economists at PwC Canada noted in September 2025 that federal energy investments now account for over 3% of GDP, the highest in 2 decades. Much of this growth is driven by infrastructure spending linked to the nuclear sector. In other words, Trump's economic squeeze has pushed Canada to reindustrialize faster than expected. The irony is hard to ignore.
As U.S. companies lobby for tax breaks to offset rising import costs, Canadian firms are finding stability in government-backed energy and construction contracts. While Trump's tariffs raised prices in American factories, they also made Canada's domestic production more attractive to global investors seeking predictable energy costs. The political contrast is striking. Trump's strategy relies on confrontation. Carney's relies on capacity. One weaponizes tariffs, the other builds reactors. The outcome is clear. As the U.S. turns inward, Canada is scaling up. From Darlington to Alberta, a pattern is emerging. Canada is transforming from a supplier of raw materials to a producer of advanced energy infrastructure. Nuclear power, once a cautious experiment, has become a central pillar of the country's economic identity. The numbers tell the story. According to Ontario Power Generation's 2025 update, every billion US dollars invested in SMR development supports roughly 6,000 direct and indirect jobs. The Darlington cluster alone could generate over $2 billion in tax revenue over the next decade. These figures are driving new training programs, research partnerships, and supply chain investments across the country. The Alberta consultations show that momentum is spreading. Provinces are no longer waiting for federal incentives. They're competing to host the next wave of nuclear manufacturing. For the United States, this shift carries strategic consequences. By insulating its economy with tariffs, Washington may have triggered a new competitor next door, one that combines clean energy leadership with industrial stability. Canada's nuclear build-out gives it something every modern economy craves: dependable, affordable power in a volatile world. What began as a $3 billion investment east of Toronto is now a national mission. Factories, universities, and provincial governments are aligning around the same idea, that Canada's strength lies not in chasing America's policies, but in charting its own. In that sense, the reactors rising at Darlington are more than concrete and steel. They are a declaration of independence. Trump wanted to make America dominant again, but in doing so, he may have created his toughest rival yet, an energy superpower being built quietly just across the border.